When the snow starts to fall, the roads begin to get slick. And in response, municipalities across the country unleash their fleet of snowplows to clear the streets. And in doing so, they often leave piles of salt behind. And while it may not seem obvious, those piles of salt are a part of a delicate balancing act to ensure our roads are safe and our waterways aren't too salty.
We just try to be strategic with it and also using with just the right amount for what the weather calls for.
Brian Johnson is the spokesperson for the Streets Division in Madison, Wisconsin. When the forecast calls for significant snowfall, he coordinates loading trucks with salt. But Johnson says the salt doesn't flow freely.
The blue areas are where they don't salt. It's sort of called deadheading, where they're just driving there to get to their next spot.
Instead, the amount spread is carefully calculated.
Whenever we put salt down, we try to be as careful as we possibly can with putting it down. The max rate we put it is around 300 pounds per lane mile. So every lane mile of traffic would be 300 pounds of salt on those select lanes that we've even put salt down on. That's all really carefully managed.
Johnson's crews mainly spread rock salt, also known as sodium chloride.
It's that one tool that we have to kind of get the snow off the road to return things back to bare pavement. What salt does is that when it binds to the snow molecules or the snow crystals, it lowers that freezing point and it turns things back to water. And it kind of creates that saltwater brine that rushes off to the side of the street.
Having guidelines for how much salt to use is important to prevent oversalting roads.
There's a tipping point when it comes to how much salt it actually does any good and how much is just making it crunchy or sort of a winter-saftey theater by putting extra salt down so it looks like something was done.
Applying too much salt can have long-term impacts.
Anywhere that we have, higher density of roads and salt that's going down, that salt goes down, it melts snow, and it moves with that snow melt into our water bodies.
Allison Madison is the program manager of Wisconsin Saltwise. Their mission is to educate municipalities and average citizens on the best winter maintenance practices.
The basic Saltwise training introduces all of the best management practices for snow and ice control. And we talk about in that training the importance of using application rate charts as guidelines for what material to use and how much of it to put down in a given area.
Storm drain runoff during the winter puts excess salt into the water system, and that salt can have detrimental impacts on our waterways.
When that gets into our stormwater system, which for us here goes straight to the lakes, that when those start decaying, it sucks all the oxygen out of the water. So it had a potential to create fish kills, which we really didn't want, especially if we're using like a high volumes of it, like what we would have to do considering the city streets we'd be maintaining.
And they're also costly to our infrastructure. So if we can help people use salt just as needed, that means they pay less for the salt. And then there's less damage to bridges and roads. The replacement cost goes down because salt creates so much premature aging.
When used correctly, rock salt alternatives like brines can help lower the overall impact, but they aren't always the most effective solution.
Straight salt brine, sodium chloride, and water works fairly effectively down to 15-20 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's when we have to switch to use chemicals like magnesium chloride, calcium chloride. They're also in that chloride kind of family, right? They're like the cousins of sodium chloride, but they're bigger, they're tougher. They can do a lot of melting even at lower temperatures, but they cost more and they can actually do more environmental damage.
Both Madison and Johnson agreed that removing the snow before it gets a chance to stick is the best practice.
The number one thing is always mechanical removal, moving snow, right? We want to be using chemical de-icers just to break that bond between snow and pavement so we can move the snow off it.
If you can shovel it before you need to put the salt down, that's going to be the best choice to try to avoid using it. More salt isn't the right answer. In residential situations, it's less than what you think. It's only like about a coffee cup will do 3 or 4 like sidewalk squares. It doesn't take a lot to do what's right for our sidewalks.
Ultimately, using salt during the winter months is necessary to keep the roads safe. But as more people across the country educate themselves about salt's impact on the environment around them, that delicate balance gets a little bit easier.